one. Walk with me through the cellar door.
The storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to episode 131. Thank you for joining us on Cellar Door Skeptics. As the show starts up, Han and I are sitting here discussing the Trump-Singapore conversation. And I'll be honest, we're not going to focus on that tonight. Tonight, we already had a pre-planned episode. We didn't know G7 was going to have a meltdown. We didn't know... Okay, maybe you did. I didn't.
I knew it that there was just going to be Trump. Well, I didn't think he was going to pay as much lip service and be like he was like best friends with everyone. I mean, it was kind of not quite sincere, but he was like, we're going to do everything we can to make sure trade is equal. And as soon as Trump left Quebec, then he was just like, everybody's a jackass. They're all stupid. Like it was like
it's like
Napoleon
Garrison
Dynamite
from the South Park. No, it was like South
Napoleon
Park all of
Dynamite.
a sudden with Mr. Garrison.
That's
exactly what it reminded me of. It's like he watched that and said, "Hey, somebody got me right. This is soothsaying. This is people predicting what I'm going to do."
I knew that like he was going to pretty much play lip service. He doesn't have this spine to tell these people off to their face. He really doesn't. Like if he was as big as blustery as he says he is, he would tell Justin Trudeau to his face, "No, I think you're wrong. I'm going to tear up the hell out of your country." And he would tell Angela Merkel, "Nope, I don't care. The European Union is stealing from us." But he didn't do that. In person, he said, "Oh, this is great. We all need to get along, and it should be all equal. Maybe we'll get rid of all tariffs." And then as soon as he left, he was yelling into his Twitter. So it's just like whatever, dude.
Yep. And
So
so
be best friends with your new dictator buddy.
yeah, we call them the dictator duo.
The two dictators.
Dictator duo.
The Fox News two dictator meeting. I love that.
But tonight we've decided to avoid that topic, and maybe we'll cover it next week. I don't know, but we decided to avoid that topic. We have a couple of different things. We're bringing the science segment back for once. You know, we talked about science all the time, and I found an article from The Atlantic on genetically engineering monkeys with brain disorders. Thought that would be good to talk about. We can't pass up talking about net neutrality. And I have some very pointed opinions on the Supreme Court decision in the Baker case. And
I read through your notes, dude. I'm surprised, but we're definitely on the same page. I figured it would be a little bit more ornery on your end, but no, I really think that we've got some cool stuff to talk about that's like educational for a lot of people who are yelling and screaming about the end of days about this topic.
And, you know, I'll be honest, I still feel close to the end of the days.
Oh, yeah.
But I wanted to have a different type of conversation around
more specific on what actually happened.
Yeah. And I feel it's kind of more like, you know, they punted the football in this case, I guess. But we want to start out with net neutrality because we talked about this subject, I don't know, at least four times in the history of this show.
Yeah.
And officially on June 11th, net neutrality has died. It just has.
Well, it's a 2-year experiment, basically. Like the Obama administration said that we need to preserve the utility-like nature of the internet now.
Yeah. And I don't know. You know, this is one of those topics. This is pretty passionate for me as an individual. I have a hard time accepting that we're going to allow internet capitalistic companies to dictate to us what we can and what we can't do, where we're going to spend our money, how we're going to do it. And I get that this is not really a specific party issue as much as it is a issue that capitalistic corporate elites are trying to decide for us.
Basically, to break down the entire situation here, what we got, the net neutrality law essentially says that the ISPs, internet service providers, Comcast, Time Warner, whoever you have that supplies your internet connection, they cannot discriminate on the content that you get. They have to give you it's like when you turn the faucet on and it lets water in, like they can't squeeze the faucet a little bit or turn a little knob to reduce the water pressure if you're looking at a certain kind of website. So like if Time Warner,
so it's not like Facebook where they can dictate everything what ads you get based on what you search for.
That's part of the issue, and that's part of their argument. What they're saying basically, what the net neutrality law says is that whoever provides the internet has to provide you essentially full speed, whatever you pay for. So the speed that you pay for is the speed that you get. So like Comcast, 5 meg upload, that's what you get. Now, if you're using that to watch Netflix or if you're using that to upload videos to YouTube, and let's say you are an adamant atheist, angry person, and Comcast for some reason has some kind of weird reason why they don't like non-believers, they would literally be allowed to funnel or strangle, let's say, Pathos or Free Thought blogs. They would be allowed to slow down the speed and the feed for those pages if net neutrality wasn't allowed, or they would require you to pay extra money to get those sites at full speed, but the sites that they were connected to, so let's say Time Warner has a great connection with Hulu. So Hulu is at full speed, no extra cost, whatever, you just pay your Hulu fee. But Netflix or your Pathos or Free Thought blogs are slow, but you got to pay for a package or some kind of thing. So what this does is it turns it into microtransactions and changes the speeds and the feeds and all of the different types of things that you can get on the internet. It allows your ISP to have that kind of control as of right now, or as of right before the net neutrality law ended. The ISPs could not funnel or control any of the content. And what their argument basically is that like Facebook is allowed to control where you go, what you see, because it's a private site and private organization, that the internet service providers are saying, well, private organizations, we should be allowed to use our free speech arguments to, support or unsupport or charge you bundled prices or whatever on the internet. So essentially, making the internet a fully free market capitalistic environment. And that's where you were basically coming through. And so the whole idea is whether or not these companies will take advantage of and create this, this pocket of user space where you have to pay to get what you want, or if they'll do the right thing and they won't funnel it down, because they said that they're not going to change it. All the ISPs said they're not going to change, and they're not going to be these authoritarian overlords. I don't believe them, and I'm assuming you don't believe them either. But that's essentially the state and the worry that everyone has here is whether or not they can do it, and now they're allowed to do it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, today the FCC said the repeal does away with unnecessary heavy-handed regulations and replaces them with common sense regulations that will promote investment and broadband deployment. And here's where I have a problem, just that statement alone, is the FCC is not repealing ridiculous rules that are heavy-handed. Essentially, and this is kind of funny, hold on. This is kind of funny because, when you look at a libertarian perspective, there's a big argument, right? A lot of libertarians are upset by this because you're taking away these free speech type things. You're promoting big business, but you're taking away free speech. And I've gotten, weirdly enough, I side with the libertarians on this that, look, these are not unnecessary heavy-handed regulations. These are regulations saying corporations cannot control what you consume. And I agree with that in some aspects. And this does kind of play into our last topic in the night, about the cakes and the bakers and the Supreme Court. But, when we look at these different things, why should tech companies that can make billions of dollars off of the average consumer be able to dictate what we can and cannot view? And I take this farther than a free speech discussion. This is not just a free speech discussion. Can you say what you want, consume the media you want? What it does is it opens a gateway right now to allow for corporations to make decisions on what you can consume versus what you can't consume. And the reason that net neutrality is such a distinguished thing that we should allow for free is because of the fact that we have a lot of different cultures and a lot of different communities. And the problem becomes is that when we start saying, hey, this community is only allowed to view this type of information at this speed and everything else has to be slowed down, we're now taking the world and we're controlling how it learns. If the world learned through books, it would almost be like Fahrenheit 451, right? You know, like we're going to burn the books that nobody wants, or we're going to scorch them so you have to like decipher the language in them. That's what this feels like.
One of the things that a lot of the people that are economists, they really don't think that this is going to turn into like a censorship issue where it's really like ideological. What they think is going to happen is like you think of your cable law or your cable internet service provider and your cable provider. Like I want the basic package, and it has like a couple of channels, whatever, and then like you can get like I want the basic package plus the sports package, and you can get all the ESPN 1, 2, 3, 19, 14, whatever extra numbers that they have there. Like what is it, ESPN Ocho with a dodgeball movie, and so like all of those things there, it's like it's a microtransaction. There's a small package. If you want access to the sports on cable, you got to pay that little bit. You want access to the HBO, Showtime, Cinemax, whatever, softcore porn at 11:30 in the evening, that's where you want to go, then that's going to be, there's a small transaction fee. And so like what they're thinking is, I think what the internet's going to turn into is the ISPs are going to be like, you want the Facebook, Yahoo, Google, whatever package. Here's you want to use, if you want to use these other sites, you want the Reddit, 4chan, whatever, pages for that, then you're going to basically pay a microtransaction for those fees. And so what they're doing is they're going to turn the internet, instead of this one size fits all, into this metered and monitored thing. So like what they were trying to do for ISPs is like charge you like a utility, where how much do you download? Well, however much you download, this is how much you pay per meg downloaded or whatever. And that really didn't succeed, and then people wouldn't accept that, because it's just like when you want service, and people were just like, we hate ads. Well, and then websites are like, well, if we don't have ads, we have to charge you to use the site. People are like, well, I don't want to pay to use the site either. It's like, you can't have both. And so these ISPs want to make money off these small package deals, and they could remove ads and they can make the environment different. But what we're worried about is if they start using the censorship in the ideological area. And what economists think is it'll be more towards the economic areas. Like, how can they make the most money? Ideological stuff set aside. But groups like Fox Network, so what is that, 21st Century Fox, they own Fox News, and they would be interested in getting directly connected with Time Warner. And so like all of those sites would be obviously biased directly towards that. And that's the word. It's then a lot of the Ajit Pai, who is the FCC chairman, he's like, this is good. What if CNN and their parent corporation, I believe is Time Warner, what if they decided that they were gonna just like buy into some other, or get bought in by some other major, like super George Soros owned liberal rag, and like basically made the internet like this total Hillary Clinton paradise, right? Like, yeah, because they could do that. They could do that. It's just like the same idea. It's like when you allow prayer before I guess city council meetings or whatever, you also are allowing a satanic invocation. That's part of the thing. So like essentially they're allowing this like communist socialist internet plan. I mean, that's part of what they're doing here by opening that up to economics. And I think they would be like, no, we need to censor that crap. It's like, you can't have it both ways. And that's what I think they're losing here, is that by not having it be a completely open net, neutral net, that they're losing their perspective. They could potentially get locked out and have this like crazy socialist internet that would be legal.
Yeah. And I don't know if I call it a socialist internet.
No,
friend.
but like just like the whole idea, like a total communist, lefty, liberal, socialist, whatever tag words Sean Hannity uses to yell at intelligent people.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. In NPR, they said this. They said the gutting of net neutrality is a symbol of our broken democracy, but it has sparked an unprecedented backlash from across the political spectrum, and internet users are coming out of the woodwork to fight tooth and nail in Congress, in courts, and at the local and state level. The internet is coming for net neutrality. And it's kind of funny, they talk about, whether this is a big thing or not, right? They talk about that. Is this a big thing? Is this something that's going to affect a lot of people? And, they kind of claim, well, hey, if they're going to make money off of it, and the majority of people are investing or looking at these sites, they're not going to restrict them. But for you and me, for those of us that don't read mainstream media all the time, it is going to affect us. It is going to affect, what we see, what we talk about, what we feel. If my Atlantic article takes, 4 minutes to load instead of 30 seconds, I've got a problem with that.
If dial up.
Yeah, exactly. And so, the problem becomes is that I agree with figuring out how we can censor different crazy sites, right? I agree with that. Should we figure out how to get rid of white supremacy? Should we figure out how to get rid of incels? Yes. But net neutrality is not going to do that. Because net neutrality...
inside you.
Yeah, well, net neutrality is not going to fix that. Net neutrality allows for these people to happen, allows for us as a community to vote on it, and allows for people not to profit off of what's popular at the time. And if you think about, the election in 2016, what was popular? Anti-Hillary rhetoric.
Well, just the populist message.
Yeah.
Like the outsider message. So like the left side and the right side. So like the Donald Trump anti-establishment, the Bernie Sanders anti-establishment. It's just one party was much better at directly suppressing, I guess, the influence of that outsider section in their primaries.
Yep. And as far left as I lean normally, for me, the net neutrality thing is a simple stop doing that. Because to me, it becomes this is a conservative principle where conservative organizations, conservative politics wants to profit off of the fact that people are able to restrict what you're able to read, what you're able to consume. And it sounds a lot closer to an authoritarian dictatorship than we've ever been before. And the problem I have is the fact that when we look at what administration we're under, Trump did nothing to stop this. He's done nothing to do anything about these things. And
he supports this, I guarantee.
Exactly. And we can say here, you know why he supports it? Because it's a capitalistic venture that says, how can I make more money? Because it's a top-down BS effect. The more money we bring in for these large corporations, the more ability we have to help influence society to a better means. Well, we all know trickle-down effect does not work. It does not work. You cannot provide more than 3 instances that demonstrates that it does work. And so that's the problem here is creating a net neutrality law is like saying, hey, I'm going to create trickle-down effect through the internet providers. It doesn't work. It's never going to work. No matter what we do, it's not going to work. All I can hope is that this year people go out of their way to vote others out of office so that we no longer have this Republican majority and we have a better mix between Democrats and Republicans to discuss these important issues that we're facing.
Basically, what I think what you're trying to get to is that like what it needs to be is it needs to be utility. Like the internet itself has become essentially a tool necessary for survival and to exist in modern society, in the modern United States. It really has. Like the infrastructure needs to be increased in places throughout the United States that don't have readily access to the internet. I mean, there are places that are still at dial-up. I mean, there really are. In like places like West Virginia and places like the Dakotas, like there is no fast, high-speed internet in those locations, and that needs to be changed. And so with that, let's say that the United States invest in the infrastructure to get the entire country at least to a high-speed broadband speed. the internet itself should be a utility. It should be no different than our power grid structure. I mean, there are private companies that provide the power grid, but it is completely and totally monitored and kept in check by the U.S. government and all of the regulatory programs. And in that, what we've done is essentially taking what was, power, and people were, I guess, exploiting people and charging crazy amounts of money, and it was like a regional monopolies. We've turned that into something that you get a house, you buy a house, here's the bill for the electricity at your house, here's the company you pay, whatever. The internet should be the same way. And I would go even a step further in saying that we should all have, instead of having, just like, here's your username, just sign up and do whatever. Like, I really think we should create like a driver's license for the internet, so that each person has not their social security number, but like their internet security number, and that number is your internet person, and it's your persona, and it essentially removes the anonymous nature of the internet. So like, we remove all of this cancerous commenting where you can just go online and say everything you wanted and you have absolutely no consequences. Like, those kinds of things, like the transparency, the opening up of the internet, that's going to be a benefit and a push for our society, because you can't go on and be a racist online and not have anybody know that you're that racist. Like, your face would be directly tied to it, or whatever way that we could do this. But like, taking that away, if you're going to say something horrible on the internet, everybody's going to know it's you saying that. And if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But you need to be comfortable with that, with your position. So it make people think twice about doing some of the horrible things they do. And then if the internet is a utility and it's monitored like all other utilities, like some cities in the country have created a full-on internet utility. It's city-based, city-controlled. What are they going to do? Are they going to have any kind of manipulations to this? I don't think they'll even be affected by the net neutrality law, which that's kind of this inoculation. So if we could skip net neutrality law and just make internet a utility, then that's fine, and then we don't have to worry about this anymore. I don't think that'll happen because there's too much work and too much investment necessary. But like, those are the two things that I really wish could happen to the internet, and I think that would fix a lot of these problems.
Exactly. And, as we close the segment out, 20 states have filed a lawsuit to stop net neutrality repeal. Several states, including New Jersey, Washington, Oregon, and California, have gone so far as to push legislation to enforce the principles of net neutrality within their borders. But the big thing here is local legislation could lead to a legal showdown. The FCC order that just took effect asserts authority to prevent states from pursuing laws inconsistent with net neutrality repeal. And the logic here, folks, is we're watching a Republican-based Senate sit there and say state laws no longer matter. And is exactly. And as we talk through this, as we look at the hypocrisy of these states, we sit here and want to go, you just published something that says states don't get rights, but yet you strive on state rights.
That's the whole basis. That's the whole basis of their platform, is states' rights and individual rights over government rights, over centralized. And I mean, I don't understand.
And while I agree that the majority of states haven't filed a lawsuit, all this states to us is that if the FCC is put in a showdown, the chances are the more liberal states that are pushing against net neutrality, which is a bipartisan discussion, they're going to lose. And we can sit here and all day and talk about how what we want to do is change the world. And I'm telling you right now, it's not voting Republican. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics to talk about a scientific discovery, or maybe just that China is farther ahead than the United States. We don't know, but we'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics to talk all about it.
This is Trav Mamone, host of the By Any Means podcast, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution. We have cookies.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics.
For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today, because we bring the discussion with the sources.
Hey, this is Keith.
And this is Jen, and we're from Not Another Atheist Podcast.
You're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Join the revolution.
And now, back to Cellar Door Skeptics with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all for joining us for another amazing episode.
Hello.
We decided that we were going to talk about monkeys tonight.
I went British because I can't do a Chinese accent without being like offensive in some way.
I have no Chinese accent. I have no British accent. I have drunk Chris accent, but no like specific like accents.
Drunk
but, like,
Chris accent isn't too far from Chinese, I would bet. I mean, there's a lot of ongs and wongs that are probably strewn out a little bit, but either way, what are we doing? Is this like the Indiana Jones thing where they eat the monkey brains?
No.
What the hell's going on here?
I decided I wanted to do an actual science segment for once, because we talk about science and then we never do it because the politics is just like taking a big, large DUMP all over our lives.
Well, it's really hard to like spend the time to do the research on a good science segment too. Like when we do a science segment, we want to spend time to know what the hell we're talking about.
But I found it a very interesting article, and I'll be honest, I did succumb to the
succubus.
Yeah, that is called the titles of it, and it says China is genetically engineering monkeys with brain disorders.
Oh,
I
yeah,
immediately
I've heard
was
about
drawn
this,
to that. Instantaneously, I was like, "Hey, I have to read this article because I don't understand why or what's going on." But I wanted to talk about it, and so there's a facility in Guangdong province where researchers are tinkering with monkeys' brains in order to understand the most severe forms of autism. And this brings up a big dilemma, right? We're going to talk about a couple of things here. We're going to talk about the
moral
ethics.
as shit.
Yeah. We're going to talk about the ethics of doing this. We're going to talk about, the benefits of doing this. And we're also going to talk about, the science behind what's actually happening and how long it's been happening. Technically, since 1977, there has been tons of students that have looked into essentially deciding whether they want to go to medical school or not, right? And there's a lot of people that are saying that we need to figure out how can we do cutting edge research. And what's one of the big areas that people can do that in? Genetics. Genetics is the big discussion point, right? Of where we can go as a society, how we can, I don't want to say engineer the future, but essentially people want to find out where the problems lie. And whether we all disagree or agree whether we should be modifying monkeys to become autistic or not, we can at least agree that studying autism will help us in the long run, because while a lot of people in society want to say autism is this sign of weakness, I see autism as just a unique kink to, the way the world worked. And I guess kink's the wrong word, right? It's not a kink. It's just
it's an evolutionary change.
It's just it's an evolutionary change. Very good word. Thank you. And that's the thing is, we have to understand autism, because I'm not one of those people that want to put autistic people down. I think that we should be talking to them. My brother spends quite a bit of his high school career actually talking with autistic people and mentoring them and working with them. And him and I have actually had some very good conversations. And, for the record, I won't have him on the show until he turns 18, just because I don't want to have a minor on the show. But we've talked through different aspects of things that he's learning, things that he's doing. For example, he wants to study music therapy with autistic people.
it's amazing, right? You know, I mean, like, just how can we bring these people into our century without treating them like inhuman objects? And that's like, that's what his whole career is. Like, in high school, this is what my brother's doing.
He's already planned it out. This is like his area of expertise that he plans on going to college for.
Yeah, and he's sitting there, he's saying, you know, hey, look, folks, you know, I mean, he's saying these are people, and if we understand how they work, we might be able to understand how society can work together with different types of people. And it's amazing because it's like there's so many different aspects to the autism spectrum. And if we're willing to indulge and understand it, we might find that not only is there more people that are autistic in some, you know, range of things, but we might find that they benefit society probably even more than, I don't know, the average person does.
There are some interesting philosophical questions and thoughts that I've seen. It's kind of leaning in toward the evolutionary biology aspect of these things, like things like autism. The question is that these developmental changes, mutations, or whatever, are these short inclinations and short changes in the human brain, the human genome, the way everything works? Are these small micro changes that turn into a larger trend that actually creates evolution in a positive direction for humanity? So what I'm saying is that if you look at a lot of these savants, people that are autistic, that are like the Rain Man syndrome, right? I like to call it Rain Man syndrome. In the movie, the guy is like a numbers guru. Like everything he sees numbers wise forever in his head, no problem. Like to some people in a specific area, a certain specific context, he is a superior human when it comes to computational analysis in the brain. And so they're saying that these could be these small mutations, these things that are changing what humans are. And if you take that as a collective, it could be part of the change for humans leaving the state of nature, leaving, you know, just a pure state of predators attacking humans, must survive, hunter-gatherer, to agricultural, to our modern society was a technological, carbon-based, silicon-based chip stuff, to the next level. Whatever the next level may be, it may take these brains that are hyper specific in their abilities to deal with numbers and computation and analysis. But there may be a need for different levels and different variations. So like one type of brain that's good for this and one type of brain that's good for that. Like these are wild speculations in what could be good for humans, what could be bad for them. But like autism isn't something to be cured as opposed to be learned about. And so like what I'm getting from this article is that the Chinese, they're manipulating the brains in the monkeys to specifically find more out about autism, find what's going on in the brain, find how to essentially learn more what's going on there, because you can't do human studies. And so what they're trying to really find is that in this, like, what are the benefits, what are the negatives, and is there something genetically that they can take from manipulating the genome in these monkeys to try to learn more about autism and other psychological and I guess physiological changes in the brain. Like this to me is very interesting because this is evolution in work. The whole concept of this, everything they're learning from here is another huge piece of proof that evolution is true and works, because they're learning specifically from changes in, you know, cell genome and all that kind of stuff. This I really think this is cool. I would love to see more. I would love to see more funded. I'm kind of sad that it's in China and not in the United States.
Yeah. So they talk about the symposium where they talk about science have alluded to the potential of using CRISPR. Exactly.
Oh, we talked about that before.
We have more than one time.
I did a full-on symposium
technique on primate brains, and that's the discussion here, right? You know, so if you go through this article, they talk about, you know, how do we, you know, what's happening, where do we look at, you know, and the problem is this is a very controversial topic, and that's why I wanted to cover this, because on a moralistic side, they're creating brains that are autistic because they were able to map them, and
their brains inside a living creature too, like the whole being. Like it isn't just like a brain in a lab. Like this is an entire creature. Yeah, yeah. This isn't a Cy 10 Bruggencate moment here. This is a brain inside of a living creature that they're tinkering with the brain before this creature comes out. So the creature in its whole lives either an injured or a partially aware life or whatever. And so there are a ton of little monkeys out there that essentially are forced, or is it basically? I didn't go through, or at least I didn't notice anything with this thing. They're intentionally giving these monkeys autism, or is it they're pulling them out like the ones that have it? They're definitely doing the test.
No, they are. They're essentially doing what's called a knockout with a specific gene to try and disable it, right? And there's a thing called the SHANK3 gene, and I've never heard of this until this article, but there's this SHANK3 gene that is discussed as a possible mutation in humans through the autistic spectrum, right? Okay. And they talk about how they knock out mice. They talk about how they use this specific gene in mice. And the difference is they're saying is, hey, well, mice are different than humans. What's the closest thing to humans, i.e. a monkey? How can we create or replicate the same thing in monkeys? And we could talk about, is there an awareness in monkeys? Do we have the same definition that we can apply to a monkey versus a human? Are we able to create this genome map, inside of this species that allows for us to study autism on a different spectrum? Is that ethical? I don't know.
Well, we give as far as I know, I don't know if the United States does, but as far as I remember, the European Union recently changed that you cannot do experimentation on octopi, because they've essentially gone through their neuro cortisol and basically the neurological firings, and they found that they could actually respond and feel pain, and so they said no. Well, I mean, it's a pretty easy thing if you've ever seen a monkey functioning in society. Like, pain is something that is completely and totally available in the lower, mid, and higher primates. I mean, this isn't a question. So, like, if you're dealing with chimpanzees, monkeys, apes, anything in that area, like, these are creatures that if you do something to you manipulate what they're doing, like, they will feel the pain. They will. The question is the self-awareness or whatever. But like, there is a physical aspect here that, like, if these creatures are essentially the genes are turned on and turned off, and they're intentionally given this one syndrome, they're intentionally this has to be a scientific experiment, so variables have to be controlled for that. I mean, there could be a whole generation of these small creatures whose lives are kind of miserable to I guess push forth and put forth more learning for humans and progress for humans in the future.
Yeah. So they talk about the process as genetically engineering a masquerade is not trivial, even with the advanced tools of CRISPR. Researchers begin by dosing female monkeys with the same hormones used in humans in vitro fertilization. They then collect and fertilize the eggs and inject the resulting embryos with CRISPR proteins using a long, thin glass needle. Monkey embryos are far more sensitive than mice embryos, which is what we talked about a little bit earlier, and can be affected by small changes in the pH of the injection or the concentration of CRISPR proteins. Only some of the embryos will have the desired mutation, and only some will survive once implanted in surrogate mothers. It takes dozens of eggs to get just one live monkey, so making even a few knockout monkeys required the support of a large breeding community. And that's where it gets into the ethics of it, right?
This is with CRISPR too. This is with CRISPR too. That's one of the things we talk about. CRISPR makes, like, you can completely control way more specific the changes that you're doing on this. So, like, back in the day when they would make specific proteins that they wanted to replicate, like, it was way more. It's like you're only talking about a few dozen. Like, in the past, it was way more than a few dozen. Like, we're talking generations of monkeys. So, like, CRISPR speeds it up, and it's still this cumbersome. It still takes a large breeding colony to get what you need. Because I've actually written about this. If you look it up, in vitro analysis in the Cellar Door Skeptics blog, you'll see it. I did a post about how much how much failure happens in vitro, basically fertilized eggs that never do anything. And I mean, this is like, we could call this natural abortion or scientific abortion or whatever, but like this is something that happens pretty regularly. In vitro analysis or in vitro fertilization, it is a massive failure on average. The success rate, I think it was like 20% or less. And so, like, using these monkeys and doing something along those lines, like, you're going to have, it's going to take a huge breeding colony to actually get what you need, which is crazy if you really think about the ethics of the situation. Like, if people are, like, if you're a vegan or a vegetarian or whatever, you think, like, the animal feelings is a big deal. This is something that maybe we could solve the autism problem, but there's going to be a lot of animal physical pain, or at least, I guess, animal mental health, that will be affected in the process of actually finding the solution, if this results in a solution in the future.
Exactly, and that's what they talk about. Essentially, because of our laws and regulations, we're not able to do the same work in America as we are in China. And we could talk about, is that is that effectual,
good?
Right? Is that moral? Is that what we should be doing? And I think it kind of goes back to where you define or where you draw the law of where primates are psychologically, evolutionarily, and competently, yeah, and what we're going to do to either make them part of society or not. And I think that's, we talk about, the big thing about this article is China doesn't have the regulations that we do. China doesn't have a parent that looks down on us about what's going to happen if we die, when we die, and what happens to us before we die. America does. Which, as much as you and I rail on the American system, on the fact that America fails first, typically, we also miss that there is quite a few regulations that protect things.
Yeah, that's why I'm a huge supporter of, like, socialist programs where, like, it's the strengthening of the central government when it comes to regulatory affairs. I mean, it's like the Chinese are essentially diving into something before they really know what they're doing. I mean, this is dangerous. If you think about what's going on as far as the potentialities for negativity. I mean, the slower and the global perspective as to how, why, what, where, when, and covering every base is good. The capitalistic approach to this, which is weird that the Chinese are the first to it, because they like to call themselves a communist society when they're basically a state capitalist society where the major forms of all capitalism are directly state owned. But regardless, like, they're willing to go much further and much deeper into what I would call human rights violations and animal rights violations. It's like things that the United States is not cool with, and the U.S. is pretty capitalistic in general. Like, in the end, really what we're looking at is that, like, the Chinese are going to be able to go and do more things, and just willy-nilly. They've been talking about doing human embryo research and genetic manipulations there. Like, there are all kinds of side effects and things that really could make a difference in the long run. It's kind of like how Republicans in the United States say that climate change and that kind of stuff is no big deal. Like, the science says that it could potentially be a huge deal. You should pay attention to what it says. And the same with genetics. Like, the Chinese are ignoring major warning signs and just going ahead with things that could be potentially dangerous or, I guess, malicious. And I would love to see, a more cooperative worldwide perspective on this.
So in fairness to the Chinese, and I want to close with this, in fairness to the Chinese and in fairness to this research study, a lot of the primates are not specific models to this work, right? They are the clear path forward, but the difference is the first steps that they want to talk about is how to identify the changes in the mutation caused in the brains. And then researchers might use that information to find target drugs, which could be tested in these similar monkeys, right? And so they talk about this. They talk about that we shouldn't just fall behind, that we shouldn't just fall prey to successful gene editing. And they talk about how in October they've met with other experts that have discussed the implications of editing these primate genes. And then they talk about the ethics of this. So this is, while you and I can, degrade on China and the fact that they're differently moral than we are, in fairness, they're creating committees. They're working with the Worldwide Committee of NAM to talk about whether this should be supported or not.
And in the long run, the first thing that they say is primates should only be used in other models that should not be used in other models that do not work. And the only clear path forward is identified through research and through evenly discussed means. And that's the point here, is that even though, China is probably going a little bit farther than we are, all that means is that instead of us as the United Nation, us as the American nation stepping up and saying, hey, how do we work with them? How do we find out if this is moral or not? All we're saying is, hey, let's blame China. And it kind of just sounds like the U.S. and North Korean summit here, where they shake hands and then everybody washes their hands of, hey, we both have nuclear weapons. We don't know what could happen, but hey, we're world powers. And so,
good luck.
Exactly. And so in the scientific literature, monkeys used in research are often described in shorthand as NHPs for non-human primates. This distinction is telling that it needs to be made throughout all the discussions that we have. We could talk about CRISPR inserting genes, we could talk about brain development, but the deal becomes is that if we don't stop and analyze where the world is going, where we're headed, and what's moral and immoral, and what we can accept and we can't start holding other countries at the same level that we hold ourselves. It's interesting to say where we're headed with this. I'm hopeful that we can discover more about autism and how we can better interact with humans in the world that we live. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics, talking about the baking decisions made by the Supreme Court. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
This is Deborah McTaggart from Beyond the Trailer Park, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Considering how you want to help Cellar Door Skeptics, head over to iTunes or your favorite podcast app and give us a rating, because every rating helps push us in front of new listeners. And since our main goal here at Cellar Door Skeptics is to provide the most accurate information possible, we hope that more ratings will mean that more people get to hear the topics that we're presenting. We don't insist that we get a 5-star rating, but Hannah's favorite number is 5, and the more gold stars he gets, the more special he's gonna feel. So what do you say? Head on over to iTunes or Google Play, give us a rating, and help engage with Cellar Door Skeptics today.
This is C-Web from ParanormalSkepticAcademy.com, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution.
And now, back to Cellar Door Skeptics with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all for joining us for the remainder of this episode. The topic that we had to cover at the end of it was the SCOTUS decision and what I'm going to call a half-baked, narrow ruling in the bakery discrimination case. I mean, we're going to get made fun of. We're going to get made fun of by religious people that are like, it's not narrow when it's 7-2, folks. And I'm like, you're right, it's not. But when we actually discuss the logic behind why the decision came down, where people landed, and the actual dissent by Kennedy, there's a difference between what you see as a 7-2 ruling where you're like, hey, look, the majority favored my conservative BS opinion.
Well, what was the ruling? That's the thing here. Like, the ruling is very specific, and that's the reason why it was so strong in one direction versus the other. Most people don't know the specifics of the ruling. That's the most important part. Like, this was a 7-2 ruling, but it was a very specific ruling. If it was a broad and open ruling, it would have been 4-5 or 5-4.
Exactly. And it's kind of funny because one of the first questions that comes up is, why did the Supreme Court even address this issue? Right? That was a question that was asked. Why did the Supreme Court address this specific issue if they were going to rule the way they ruled? Why did they just not avoid the discussion and pass on the case? Because they could have done that.
They easily could have put this into the Civil Rights Act and basically said that this is no different than discrimination against blacks sitting at the counter.
Exactly, and they could have done that as well. The problem here is that the Supreme Court essentially decided to rule in a neutral favor, and what they decided was, instead of that, the cake baking company was discriminating, or that the couple was asking for illogical reparations. They basically decided that the cake baking company was given unfair and unjust treatment under the law. So they didn't decide that they were correct in their decision. They just said, hey, you were unfairly discriminated against. And if you look at it, like, let's say a murder case, it'd be like if a murder went on trial and they're like, hey, you know what? We reviewed the evidence, and in fairness, we tampered with it a little bit because we touched it and our fingerprints are on it. So therefore you get off on a technicality. That's what this ruling felt like. And you could correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah, but to me, that's exactly what the ruling felt like, is the fact that other people touched it, therefore they found an easy out. And we could discuss all day long why they found the easy out. We could discuss all day long whether, the Supreme Court decided to take the easiest method to satisfy the public, or if it was just the fact that they didn't want to argue this specific case, so they took the neutral out in an effort to reduce the amount of criticism they would get from the public.
My basic position on this one is that the ruling itself it's a ruling against the local government, against the baking corporation. So the baking company, the baker, he said that he wouldn't bake the cake for a gay wedding, and it was just two dudes who went in looking for a wedding cake. The guy made the assumption, and he asked, I don't know the specifics as to how he discerned whether or not it was a gay wedding, but if it comes down to it where he was just like, is this for a gay wedding? And we're like, yeah. And then he was like, I don't do gay weddings. Whatever the whole dialect was to bring this whole thing into perspective. In the end, what happened was that the city itself, the city government, or the local governments, whoever it was, they came in and they were apparently too aggressive, too harsh. They didn't. I mean, one of the things that we run into in the progressive community is that we just like the conservative community, is that we have a tendency to attack and alienate and just directly go after something. And in a community that appreciates and respects the basically the freedom to be a homosexual or a non-cisgendered, a non, whatever would be the standard American fare, that these people would be allowed to have just full reign in society. There's no restrictions. The bakers that would say no to that, like that society or that community, that region, that city, whatever, they jump on it, and they jumped on it a little bit too hard. And what they said, that the Supreme Court said, is that the region, the city, the government, whoever was involved in this, attacked this guy too hard, too fast, too aggressive, too mean. Basically, like, the political correctness was too aggressive. And it doesn't surprise me that it was a majority for this, that they were just kind of too aggressive to this guy and in his bakery. That, like, in the end, like the perspective in the end, what they were doing was right, but they did it the wrong way. So this is the whole idea of, like, the Bernie bros that we always hear about, like the guys who would love the further left perspective, being aggressive and willing to do the same ad hominem attacks, like just to be completely and totally aggressive and mean and negatory. That kind of thing, it doesn't help the cause. And in this case, it seems that the local governments were so aggressive, so progressive, so anti, or so PC, so intent on attacking this guy, that they did it too fast, too quick, too mean, And in the end, they overstepped their bounds and they actually lost their own case for it. It doesn't help that the Supreme Court leans. It doesn't help that the Supreme Court leans a little bit towards the right now. But this was like a 7-2. This is way more than we expected. So, like people who understand judicial means, it seems like this is their job. It seems that the regional courts overstepped their bounds and were too aggressive, and that's what this argument is. That's what the ruling is.
Yeah. And if you look at political law and you look at the landscape of the country, right? You look at the fact that the country is right now conservative compared to liberal, right? And you can look at it is. In fact, we elected Trump, for Christ's sake. So
yeah, but because of gerrymandering and stuff like that, like the majority of the people in the country voted for Hillary Clinton.
Okay, I don't know about that.
By 3 million.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it.
So we could discuss that later. That's not the point of this discussion. Is the fact that there is the viewpoints in society is more conservative. For example, I have to argue about transgender rights more often than I should have to. I have to argue about abortion rights more often than I should have to. Hell, I have to argue about racism type things and free speech discussions more often than I should have to. And that's the point here, is that the problem is government change is slow. We can agree that that's actually probably a good thing, even though right now it's not affecting us in a good manner. Yeah. But that's a good thing that the government change is slow. And the difference is here, it feels like the Supreme Court, half the justices goes kind of punted. They are like, hey, you know what? We have to find a neutral medium. The only neutral medium we can say is that somebody was too aggressive. And in fairness, they're probably a lot more aggressive based on the fact that Colorado is a lot more progressive than the rest of the nation is outside of California. And probably Portland, Oregon. But, like outside of those couple of different areas, Colorado is a pretty progressive state. And that's the thing here, is that they took this progressive language. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying is that they looked at it, and the smaller courts took this a little bit more intentionally, more aggressive. It's not bad in my opinion, but they violated a lot of different viewpoints of the collective for the nation. And so, it brings kind of
judicial rulings, or like the judicial standards or whatever that the Supreme Court used. That's the thing. It's like they just went a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too hard. So what they need to do is they need to have perspective and think about, okay, what are we doing? Slow down, let our emotions cool down a bit. We definitely disagree with this, but we need to do it the right way. And that's the issue here, is they may have gone a little bit too much. They didn't do it the right way. They didn't do it slow enough. They didn't do it, with enough background support.
And that's not the only thing too. There was a confusion in the discussion, right? Like if you actually read the SCOTUS brief and you read the blog that it came out, right? Especially when the whole thing first happened, there's a discussion about whether the couple requested a specialty cake or just a common cake, right? So the difference is did the couple walk in and say, hey, I want a cake? I just wanted to say congratulations, Jim and Barry. Or did they walk in and say, hey, we're fabulously gay. Thank you, same-sex marriage. Fuck heterosexuals. And I guess that's really crass to say, and I don't like to say that, but that's the biggest discussion, because if you look at the brief basically says they came in and requested a cake, were denied, and offered other bakery options that were not cake, right? And then later on, you actually look at what the bakers said versus what the defendant said, and the discussion is the bakers basically essentially said, hey, we offered you whatever was standard in the case. You wanted something special, therefore we can't do it. But the problem here is that, and I will say this is the fault of the lower courts, they didn't discuss that side of it. They didn't get into, whether this was truly discrimination or whether this was just a basic effect. And unfortunately, the majority ruling came from because of the fact that nobody investigated this minute detail. Should we have to? Probably not, in fairness.
No.
For Christ's sake, this seems to be like a simple win for civil rights. This seems like to be a simple win for, LGBT rights. But for Christ's sake, because none of the lower courts were smart enough to actually analyze and say, hey, did they ask for a specialty cake or did they just ask for what's in the case?
and make it a big thing, that's how they lost. And we can be upset because, it's not a narrow decision. 72 is not a narrow decision. What's a narrow decision is the fact that if you read the actual blog after the fact, where they talk about the fact that it's not the narrow decision that defines it. It's the fact that nobody wanted to proceed or understand or talk through the logistics of whether it was a specialty cake or not. That's what defines this. And so they're leaving the door open for future cases, but they're kind of putting this and saying, hey, I don't want to make this decision right now. We're in political turmoil. Therefore, we're going to make a neutral BS decision in this case.
Well, it wasn't so much neutral BS, but like it's very specific. So the whole point of this is like when people are aggressively angry about it or whatever, is that the conservatives are like, this is a great, broad, sweeping thing. Like the guy in Tennessee who had a no gays allowed in his, I think he was a party store or liquor store. He put his sign back up this week because of the Supreme Court decision. And on the other end of things, it's like the liberals, progressives, people that are, in support of obviously this progressive nature. They're saying, well, this is a very specific ruling and it doesn't apply broad strokes. And that was the whole point, is that the Supreme Court made this decision. And they're saying that this is a very specific case of a regional or local government overreaching and being too aggressive. But the whole perspective of a baker saying no to a cake for gay people, that hasn't been solved. The only thing that's been solved is that if a regional government attacks a local corporation and requires them to do something too aggressively, that is not allowed. And so the Supreme Court decision here is actually inapplicable to what we talk about in the majority of the people that are having this conversation, is that this is not a useful, applicable decision that can be run to like in any business, any bakery, any whatever that says, no, I will not serve a gay person, gay couple, gay whatever, because of my religious views. This has not been solved. The conservative end of a lot of the media and the news media on this is that it has been solved. And the progressive end has been that, no, it hasn't been solved. In reality, it's a little bit in between, but closer towards the hasn't been solved. That this was a very specific case, and the Supreme Court made that distinction intentionally. And so that your mention that it's been punted, it has been punted to future cases. There's going to be a future case that isn't so completely, obvious that the local courts were aggressive towards that, and that this will take a Supreme Court decision to whether or not discriminating against a gay couple is different from civil rights. And I personally think there's no difference. That like you can't have a whites only water fountain, you can't have a whites only bar at your restaurant. It's the same thing with sexuality and gender. Like there's no way that there's a difference there. And so I hope, and I'm assuming you hope as well, Chris, that the Supreme Court will in the future make a decision that will be more broad stroked and basically understand the connection that this is a civil rights decision, and that this particular baker's case is essentially a specific mistake that the local government's made.
Exactly. And Brayton said this. He said, the ruling leaves a lot up in the air, though I think that it's limited to anti-LGBT discrimination. There is nothing to indicate that this court or any other would allow religious exemptions from the Civil Rights Act categories that are already forbidden as a basis for discrimination, especially race. And he goes on to say, bear in mind that the RFRA requires strict scrutiny and that the courts have said again and again that there is a compelling state interest in preventing discrimination, especially in race, where they apply the strictest scrutiny. He goes on to say this. He says, that doesn't mean it's a good decision, of course. It's a bad decision. But the real question is, what comes next? What will the courts look like when the next case comes up that doesn't have this specific out for the court to avoid ruling on the core issue? The alleged anti-Christian animus
of the commission, which frankly he feels is BS, gave them a way to punt on the core issues in the case. This question of religious exemption for anti-LGBTQ discrimination will continue to be a gray area until the court finally resolves it, and which way they resolve it will depend very much on the makeup of the court when they get to such a case. And yes, this has become a very scary prospect.
And this is one of the reasons why it's such a big deal that Mitch McConnell is saying that the only thing he's concentrating on is judicial appointments. Like if you think about Mitch McConnell, since the tax reform bill, he hasn't said a thing, man. This guy has been just completely incognito. What's he been doing? He's been working on judicial appointments. I mean, Trump has had more judicial appointments in his year of office than Obama had in like 2 or 3 years. I mean, this is a massive, massive influx of judicial appointments, and all of these people, all of these appeals courts, all of these circuit courts, all of these Supreme Courts. This is a big deal when it comes to the future of all of these decisions. And if you think about Neil Gorsuch, that guy is never going to vote for anything even remotely. I mean, he is even more right than Scalia. Like, I mean, it really is a comfortable place for the Republicans just to throw as many judges as they can at the wall. Let Donald Trump burn the bridges. As long as they have right-facing judges for all of the judicial branches throughout, I mean, the Republicans are going to be in charge of a lot of major decisions for a long, long time. I mean, they held back so many decisions while Obama was in office specifically because they were hoping for a switch, because Obama was a 2-term president, so they assumed the next presidency would be a Republican, and they were right. And they've been winning on that end for a long time now, and it hurts.
Exactly. I encourage you, when it goes out to all of the things this year that we can vote in, vote. Go out, vote. It's midterms, vote, vote, vote. And as we close, one of the big things that I've read is this. Dan Finke said this. He says, if bakers are granted the right to refuse gay couples cakes, the first question straight couples who disagree with such discriminatory practice should ask on the phone whenever they go to hire somebody should be, do you bake cakes for gay weddings? And if need be, imply that the affair you're inquiring about is a gay wedding, and do not do business with them if they refuse to do business with gays. This probably should be what gay rights supporters are doing already while the issue is unsettled. And so we could talk about this all day long. We could talk about this. We can stress about this. We can go crazy about this. We can get angry about this. And I encourage you, get angry. Get out and vote. But the big thing here is if we can't change the vote, if we can't change the Supreme Court nominations, if we can't change where we're at right now, the big thing is let's use capitalism to our advantage, and let's get rid of these discriminatory mindsets. Thank you all so much for joining us for Cellar Door Skeptics. We'll be back next week with another amazing episode where maybe we get a little bit tangency, maybe we get a little bit emotional, but above all, will be the Chris Square duel. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great night, everyone.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com